line with the organization's tagline and objectives, the organization holds the following activities, but not limited to:
research conference, summer workshops,
trainings, action research projects, forum and symposium, needs assessment, and quiz week.
certificate of membership with unique membership ID number,
discount on training and research conference fees,
priority on special trainings sponsored by the BMTS,
priorities in events and activities sponsored by BMTS,
opportunity to join or collaborate research projects, and opportunity to be appointed as speakers in trainings and seminar workshops sponsored by BMTS. Officers or BMTS division representatives.
Good day and welcome to the 3-day seminar workshop on conducting and interpreting factor analysis. This is your host for this wonderful webinar, Sir Reynaldo Siculiado Jr., a teacher from Highway Hills Integrated School of Schools Division Office of Mandaluyong City. Welcome to this 3-day webinar series, and I hope you will enjoy your stay for this webinar. To start with, let me remind everyone of the attendance link that is sent on the chat box by our hosts in this Zoom meeting. And for our participants in the YouTube Live, please access the comment in the live session for your attendance. Again, the link for the attendance for the YouTube Live will be posted on the comment section, and the link for the attendance in the Zoom meeting is in the chat box. Thank you very much. Let us have some few announcements first before we start our program. The Basic Education Mathematics Teachers Society is inviting everyone to participate in the 2022 BEMTS International Research Conference, which will be held virtually with the theme Connecting the Links of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics for an Enhanced Mathematics Teaching and Learning Process in the New Normal. The 2022 BEMTS Research Conference is open to any interested mathematics enthusiasts, which range from undergraduate and graduate students, professional teachers, to mathematics researchers. This conference is an opportunity to learn, discuss, and collaborate with fellow mathematics education researchers. It provides venue to share ideas and open network for research opportunities. The conference offers the opportunity to present, examine, and discuss current issues involving millennial mathematics education, attend significant sessions that aim to collaborate with various researchers and practitioners, and receive constructive comments on your output and welcome new informative ideas. The schedule and venue will be via Zoom from January 27 to 29, 2022. The registration fee will be for the adopted school children affected by the pandemic and other community outreach programs. There will be a discounted fee on or before October 1, 2021. For the local participants, if you are going to present, you will pay 1,300 pesos. For the presenter, which is a former member of BEMTS, will only be required to pay 1,000 pesos. And for attendees, 500 pesos. After October 1, 2021, there will be regular fees, which will be the following. For local participants, 1,800 for presenters who are non-members of BEMTS, 1,800 for presenters who are non-members of BEMTS, 1,500 pesos for presenters who are former members of BEMTS, and 1,000 pesos for the attendees. For foreign participants, $150 for presenters who are non-members of BEMTS, $100 for presenters who are former members of BEMTS, and $50 for the attendees. You may also see the details of this conference in the Facebook group of BEMTS. For additional information, please contact Dr. Rodolfo T. Aonzo Jr., the President of BEMTS Incorporated, at rtaonzo.bemts@gmail.com, or Dr. Craig N. Refugio, Vice President for Research and Extension of BEMTS, at craig.refugio@gmail.com. For details, you may contact the coordinators of the co-organizing teams posted on your screens. Again, before we begin our session for today, kindly fill out the attendance form posted in the chat box for the Zoom participants, and for the YouTube Live participants, it is posted on the comment section of the video. Thank you very much. To start this program, let us offer a prayer to our Almighty God, and this is to be followed right away by the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Let us pray. Dear Almighty and ever-loving God, we glorify your name. You have showered us with so much blessings, and your presence continuously reminds us of your faithfulness and guidance. Lord, may we humbly ask for you to shower our speakers today with your greatest inspiration so that they may share the most of their knowledge, heart, and soul to the respective topics. May we also absorb the invaluable knowledge and experiences and put this into practice. We pray that you bless all the committee in charge, that they may be able to fulfill their tasks responsibly, and the objectives they have set may all be achieved. May your infinite grace lead to the success of this seminar, and may be the living witnesses of your genuine love. Through the enactment of knowledge acquired through this activity, we ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Once again, good morning to all our viewers via Zoom and via our YouTube Live in MTM channel. Again, I am Ray, your host for today, and I'm reminding everyone who are in the Zoom to please stay muted in your microphone so that we may be able to have a smooth flow of webinar. Also, I'm reminding everyone to accomplish the attendance sheet that is sent in our chat box. Also, for our YouTube Live viewers, there will be a comment for the attendance sheet as well as our pre-test link will be sent there so that you may be able to receive your certificates. Failure to complete all the necessary requirements for the certificates will make you not receive any certificate of completion or participation. Thank you very much. If you have some questions, do not hesitate to send it in the comment section. If you are a YouTube Live viewer, if you are inside the Zoom, please send it in the chat box. Thank you very much. To welcome us for this endeavor, let us welcome the board member of BEMTS, the Dean of College of Arts and Education of St. Paul University of Dumaguete City, Dr. Maricar Flores.
Greetings, one and all. As we celebrate the National Teachers Month this October, we cannot help but give gratitude to you and to the teachers who became one of the frontliners in the area of education to ensure fulfillment of the vision and mission of the Department of Education. We teachers believe that every crisis can be turned into an opportunity. Thus, we find ways to make the best possible outcome today. Today, therefore, marks one of the most important sustainability strategies initiated and implemented by our very own new normal leaders in response to the continuous need of the teachers despite the presence of today's pandemic. This only means that nothing can hinder the quality of education we are pursuing to provide for the future generations. In behalf of the Basic Education Mathematics Teacher Society, or BMTS, I would like to sincerely thank you for choosing us to be your partner in this endeavor. Let me then thank the leaders of the Department of Education, Schools Division of Mandaluyong City, Marikina City, and Parañaque City for having this 3-day research capability webinar workshop on conducting and interpreting factor analysis, which starts today and the coming 23rd and 30th of October 2021. It is with fervent prayer that this activity will be helpful in our continuous educational mission by ensuring that we teachers, by being proactive and resilient, can still continue to develop ourselves professionally to keep abreast with the challenging times. Let's then remain enthusiastic throughout the workshop while inspiring others to do the same. With this, I welcome you all. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flores, for the warm welcome of our participants. At this juncture, it is now the time for us to listen to the first speaker of this 3-day seminar workshop. Let me introduce to you our speaker. So our speaker holds the following degrees on scholarship grants: Doctor of Philosophy in Education, Major in Research and Evaluation from the University of San Carlos, Cebu City in 2004. Master of Arts in Education, Major in Mathematics Education from Western Mindanao State University, Zamboanga City in 1995, and Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from Andres Bonifacio College, wherein he graduated magna cum laude in 1987. He is currently an Associate Professor 5, the Associate Dean of the College of Teacher Education, and the Director for International Linkages of Negros Oriental State University, Dumaguete City. He has 23 professional affiliations, including the American Mathematical Society and the American Statistical Association, as well as the College Board of the United States of America for Advanced Placement Programs for Advanced Statistics and Advanced Calculus. On February 3 to 21, 2014, he was sent by the Philippine government in cooperation with Indian government to attend the International Labor Studies Research Methods at the Indian National Labour Institute, Noida, New Delhi, India. Moreover, he has 7 professional certifications and licenses, 3 from the Philippines and 4 from the United States of America. As a researcher, he has published 25 research articles in local, national, and international refereed journals, 8 of which are published in Scopus Index journals. He presented 40 research papers in local, national and international conferences and conventions. In 2015, one of his mathematics education papers won as one of the best mathematics education research papers during the 6th Conference in Science and Math Education in Penang, Malaysia. And in 2010, he was awarded the Clays Nobel Educator Distinction Award by the U.S. National Society of High School Scholar in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. At present, he serves as Associate Editor of the editorial board of the following referee journals: Philippine Social Science Journal of the University of Negros Occidental Recoletos, Bacolod City, Philippine Innovative Education Journal of Central Philippine State University, Cabancalan City, PRISM of Negros Oriental State University, Dumaguete City, the International Journal of Advanced Study and Research of India, Ciencia Hills of Western Mindanao State University, Global Research and Development Journals, and Sabton Multidisciplinary Research Journal of Eastern Visayas State University. He has 49 citations in Google Scholar, 13 citations in Scopus Index journals, and 41 citations in ResearchGate.net. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our speaker for the first session of this 3-day seminar workshop, none other than Dr. Craig N. Refugio.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Basic Education Math Teachers Society webinar series. Today is day 1, October 9, 2021. And our topic is all about Introduction to Factor Analysis. I am Dr. Craig N. Refugio. I am from Negros Oriental State University, Main Campus 1, Dumaguete City. In my talk, I'll be talking about the basic concepts of factor analysis, and I will be giving common examples, practical examples of factor analysis. What is a factor analysis? According to Adelman and Morris, way back 1991, factor analysis is a way to condense the data in many variables into a just few variables. For this reason, it is also sometimes called dimension reduction. You can reduce the dimensions of your data into one or more super variables. The most common technique is known as principal component analysis, or PCA. How factor analysis can help researchers? Factor analysis is useful in, number 1, condensing variables. There are many variables at the very beginning, and the purpose of the researcher is to condense, to reduce those many variables into fewer variables. Number 2, uncovering clusters of responses. There are many variables. It would follow that there are also many responses. And from the many responses, they will be clustered into clusters with commonalities among responses. Number 3, providing simplicity after reducing variables. Since there are many variables and they're being reduced into fewer variables, thus those fewer variables can be classified as a simple set of variables. So you ask several questions, all driving at different but closely related aspects of customer satisfaction. Number 1, how satisfied are you with our product? Number 2, would you recommend our product to a friend or family member? Number 3, would you likely purchase our product in the future? But you only want one variable to represent a customer satisfaction score. One option would be to average the 3 question responses. Another option would be to create a factor-dependent variable. This can be done by running PCA and keeping the first principal component, also known as a factor. The advantage of PCA over an average is that it automatically weights each of the variables in the calculation. Say you have a list of questions and you don't know exactly which responses will move together and which will move differently. For example, purchase barriers of potential customers. The following are possible barriers to purchase. Number one, price is prohibitive. Number two, overall implementation cost. Number three, we can't reach a consensus in our organization. Number four, product is not consistent with our business strategy. Number five, I need to develop an ROI, but cannot or have not. Number six, we are locked into a contract with another product. Number seven, the product benefits don't outweigh the cost. Number eight, we have no reason to switch. Number nine, our IT department cannot support your product. Number 10, we do not have sufficient technical resources. Number 11, your product does not have a feature we require. Number 12, other, please specify. Factor analysis can uncover the trends of how these questions will move together. The following are loadings for 3 factors for each of the variables. So it is assumed that this set of instrument is actually being administered. The responses are loaded to a software, and is the outcome, the output from the software. So we have PC1, PC2, PC3. And we have the following questions. Price is prohibitive. Overall implementation cost. We can't reach consensus in our organization. So forth and so on, up to other, please specify. So under PC1, so we have 0.49, 0.41, and 0.68 as weights that actually meet with the requirements. Some authors would say at least 0.40, but different authors, different statisticians, different literature have different standards, and I will be talking about it later. PC2, we have 0.30, negative 0.77, 0.38, then 0.58, and we also have 0.38. PC3, we have 0.57, 0.45, 0.62. Notice how each of the principal components have high weights for a subset of the variables. The first component, as you see, PC1, or the first component, heavily weights variables related to cost. So we have price is prohibitive, overall implementation cost, and we have the product benefits don't outweigh the cost. So all of these items are actually referring to cost. So the general term labeled for these different statements are considered as cost. The second component, PC2, weights variables related to IT. So we have no reason to switch. Our IT department cannot support your product. We do not have sufficient technical resources. The third weights variables related to organizational factors. So we can give our new super variables clever names. So we can actually provide name of those factors being clustered together. And in some cases, it's actually the most difficult part because we have to research, we have to think it logically on what would be the exact name for this cluster of statements. So we have the product benefits don't outweigh the cost. Price is prohibitive. Overall implementation cost. We do not have sufficient technical resources. Our IT department cannot support your product. Product is not consistent with our business strategy. We can't reach a consensus in our organization. I need to develop an ROI but cannot or have not. Your product does not have a feature we require. We're locked into a contract with another product. Others, please specify. We have no reason to switch. So we have cost, we have IT, and we have organization. So for organization, we have the weights 0.45, 0.57, 0.62. For IT, we have 0.38, 0.58, 0.38, then negative 0.77. And for cost, we have 0.68, 0.49, 0.41. If we were to cluster the customers based on these three components, we can see some trends. Customers tend to be high in cost barriers or organization barriers, but not both. Looking at this scatter diagram, the x-axis, we have the cost barrier. The y-axis is all about organizational barrier, looking into two-dimensional factors. Factor analysis according to Hatcher, 1991. Factor analysis is a method for modeling observed variables and their covariance structure in terms of a smaller number of underlying unobservable latent factors. The factors typically are viewed as broad concepts or ideas that may be described unobserved phenomenon. For example, a basic desire of obtaining a certain social level might explain most consumption behavior. These unobserved factors are more interesting to the social scientists than the observed quantitative measurements. Factor analysis is generally an exploratory descriptive method that requires many subjective judgments. It is a widely used tool and often controversial because the models, methods, and subjectivity are so flexible that debates about interpretations can occur. The method is similar to principal components, although, as the textbook points out, factor analysis is more elaborate. In one sense, factor analysis is an inversion of principal components. In factor analysis, we model the observed variables as linear functions of the factors. In principal components, we create new variables that are linear combinations of the observed variables. In both PCA and FA, the dimension of the data is reduced. Recall that in PCA, the interpretation of the principal components is often not very clean. A particular variable may, on occasion, contribute significantly to more than one of the components. Ideally, we like each variable to contribute significantly to only one component. A technique called factor rotation is employed towards that goal. Examples of fields where factor analysis is involved include physiology, health, intelligence, sociology, and sometimes ecology, among others. So why do we use factor analysis? So factor analysis, according to Hackett, way back 1986, is a useful tool for investigating variable relationships for complex concepts such as socioeconomic status, dietary patterns, or psychological scales. It allows researchers to investigate concepts that are not easily measured directly by collapsing a large number of variables into a few interpretable underlying factors. So what is a factor? The key concept of factor analysis is that multiple observed variables have similar patterns of responses because they are all associated with latent, that is, not directly measured variable. For example, people may respond similarly to questions about income, education, or occupation, which are all associated with the latent variable socioeconomic status. In every factor analysis, there are the same number of factors as there are variables. Each factor captures certain amount of the overall variance in the observed variables. And the factors are always listed in order of how much variation they explain. The eigenvalue is a measure of how much of the variance of the observed variables a factor explains. Any factor with an eigenvalue greater than or equal to 1 explains more variance than a single factor variable. So if the factor for socioeconomic status had an eigenvalue of 2.3, it would explain as much variance as 2.3 of the 3 variables. This factor captures most of the variance in those 3 variables could then be used in other analyses. The factors that explain the least amount of variance are generally discarded. So what happened to this table? Go back to this table. Those very, very small numerical values are actually being discarded. What are factor loadings? So we'll be talking also about factor loadings as terms in factor analysis. According to RAND 2001, the relationship of each variable to the underlying factor is expressed by the so-called factor loading. Here's an example of the output of a simple factor analysis looking at indicators of wealth with just 6 variables and 2 resulting factors. So first column variables. So the variables are income, education, occupation, house value, number of public parks in neighborhood, number of violent crimes per year in neighborhood. Factor 1, we have 0.65, 0.59, 0.48, 0.38. We have 0.13, we have 0.23. Factor 2, we have 0.11, 0.25, 0.19, 0.60, 0.57, 0.55. So if you notice, the highlighted one are actually those having acceptable values. Some would say at least 0.4, some would say at least 0.3, depending on the authority that you're actually citing. So 0.13, 0.23 are not being considered. 0.11 and 0.25 are not also being considered. The variable with the strongest association to the underlying latent variable, as you see in the table, factor 1 is income, with a factor loading of 0.65. Since factor loadings can be interpreted like standardized regression coefficients, one could also say that the variable income has a correlation of 0.65 with factor 1. This would be considered a strong association for a factor analysis in most research fields. 2 other variables, education and occupation, are also associated with factor 1. So we look at factor 1, income, education, occupation, and house value. Based on the variables loading highly onto factor 1, we could call it individual socioeconomic status. The term individual socioeconomic status is actually a name created for income, education, occupation, and then house value. House value, number of public parks, a number of violent crimes per year, however, have high factor loadings on the other factor, factor 2. They seem to indicate the overall wealth within the neighborhood. So we may want to call factor 2 as neighborhood socioeconomic status. We look at factor 2. We look at number of public parks in neighborhood, number of violent crimes per year in neighborhood. If you notice, there's actually an overlap, house value for factor 1 and factor 2, but it has a greater factor loading for factor 2. So house value would belong to factor 2. Notice that the variable house value also is marginally important in factor 1. The loading is 0.38. And this makes sense since the value of a person's house should be associated with his or her income. So factor in factor analysis. So what do we mean by factor or factors in factor analysis? According to Martin and Osborne way back 2000, in factor analysis, a factor is a latent, unmeasured variable that expresses itself through its relationship with other measured variables. Take, for example, a variable like leadership. We may want to measure a person's or an organization's leadership style, but this is the kind of construct that would be impossible to measure using a single variable. It is just too abstract and multifaceted, although it does represent a single concept. So instead, you may have to develop the scale with many items, each of which measures some more measurable part of leadership. The idea would be there is an underlying unmeasurable factor, leadership, that causes people to respond in certain patterns on the many items on the scale. The purpose of factor analysis is to analyze these patterns of response as a way of getting at this underlying factor. Factor analysis also allows you to use the weighted item responses to create what are called factor scores. These represent a single score for each person on the factor. Factor scores are nice because they allow you to use single variable as a measure of the factor in the other analysis rather than a set of items. How big a sample size do you need for a factor analysis? According to Martin and Harrington way back 1999, most of the time when we plan a sample size for a data set, it is based on obtaining a reasonable statistical power for a key analysis of that data set. These power calculations figure out how big a sample you need so that a certain weight of a confidence interval or p-value will coincide with a scientifically meaningful effect size. But that is not the only issue in sample size, and not every statistical analysis uses p-values. One example is factor analysis. A factor analysis is a measurement model of an underlying construct. So like regression models, structural equation models, and latent class models, the focus is on understanding the structure of the relationships among variables. The specific focus in factor analysis is understanding which variables are associated with which latent constructs. The approach is slightly different if you are running an exploratory or confirmatory model, but the overall focus is the same. If a power is not the main issue, how big a sample do you need in factor analysis? The long answer is a little more complicated, mainly because there is not one right answer. Authors have differing opinions on exactly how many subjects you need and on exactly which criterion to use. However, we have rules of thumb. For example, some authors use a criterion based on the total sample size. 100 subjects equals sufficient if clear structure, more is better. According to Klein, 1994, 100 subjects equals poor, 300 equals good, 1,000 plus equals excellent. Comray and Lee, 1992. 300 subjects, though fewer works if correlations are high among variables. Tabachnik and Fidel, 2001. Others base it on a ratio of the number of cases to the number of variables involved in the factor analysis. 10 to 15 subjects per variable, Pett, Lucky, and Sullivan. 10 subjects per variable, Nunnally, 1978. 5 subjects per variable, or 100 subjects, whichever is larger, Hatcher, 1994. 2 subjects per variable, Klein, 1994, and then others base it on a ratio of cases to the number of factors. 20 subjects per factor, Arindale and Van der Ende, 1985. Here are a few takeaways. Number 1, you're going to need a large sample. That means in the hundreds of cases, more is better. Number 2, you can get away with fewer observations if the data are well behaved. If there are no missing data and each variable highly loads on a single factor and not others, you won't need as many cases. But counting on the data behaving is likely counting on the weather behaving during hurricane season. You will have a better outcome most of the time if you plan for the worst. Number 3, the main issue with small data sets is overfitting. A secondary issue is if the sample is really small, the model won't even converge. It is a simple concept. When a sample is too small, you can't get what looks like good results, but you can't replicate those results in another sample from the same population. All the parameter estimates are so customized to this particular sample that they are not useful for any other sample. This can and does happen in any model, not just factor analysis. All the parameter estimates are so customized to this particular sample that they are not useful for any other sample. This can and does happen in any model, not just factor analysis. Yes, confirmatory factor analysis can use p-values for overall model fit, chi-square test, as well as specific path coefficients. Exploratory factor analysis does not. So when are factor loadings not strong enough? So earlier I mentioned about factor loading. So when can we say that factor loadings are not actually strong enough? According to RAN 2001, once you run a factor analysis and think you have some usable results, it's time to eliminate variables that are not strong enough. They are usually the ones with low factor loadings, although additional criteria should be considered before taking out a variable. As a rule of thumb, your variable should have a rotated factor loading of at least absolute value of 0.4, meaning greater than plus 0.4 or less than or equal to negative 0.4 onto one of the factors in order to be considered important. Some researchers use much more stringent criteria, such as cutoff is absolute value of 0.7. In some instances, this may not be realistic. For example, when the highest loading a researcher finds in analysis is absolute value of 0.5. Other researchers relax the criteria to the point where they include variables with factor loadings of absolute value of 0.2. Which cutoffs to use depends on whether you are running a confirmatory or exploratory factor analysis, and on what is usually considered an acceptable cutoff in your field. In addition, a variable should ideally only load cleanly onto one another. So based on this concept, when our factor is loadings not strong enough, we have to read different literature and then always cite our basis of considering acceptable loadings. How many variables and observations? According to RAN 2001, another question often asked is how many variables a researcher should use for analysis. Generally, each factor should have at least 3 variables with high loadings. It is also important to have sufficient number of observations to support your factor analysis. Per variable, you should ideally have about 20 observations in the data set to ensure stable results. A common minimum is the lesser of 10 observations per variable and 100 observations. However, some statisticians would go as low as 5 observations per variable. Next is the concept on rotations as one of the terms of factor analysis. According to RAN 2001, an important feature of factor analysis is that the axis of the factors can be rotated within the multidimensional variable space. What does that mean? Here is, in simple terms, what a factor analysis program does while determining the best fit between the variables and the latent factors. Imagine you have 10 variables that go into a factor analysis. The program looks first for the strongest correlation between variables and the latent factor and makes that factor 1. Visually, one can think of it as an axis, axis 1. The factor analysis program then looks for the second set of correlations and calls it factor 2 and so on. Sometimes the initial solution results in strong correlation of a variable with several factors or in a variable that has no strong correlation with any of the factors. In order to make the location of the axis fit the actual location of the data points better, the program can rotate the axis. Ideally, the rotation will make the factors more easily interpretable. Here is a visual of what happens during a rotation when you only have 2 dimensions, x and y axis. So here's the figure. The original x and y axis are colored in black. During the rotation, the axis moved to a position that encompasses the actual data points better overall. Programs offer many different types of rotation. An important difference between them is that they can create factors that are correlated or uncorrelated with each other. So take note that an important difference between them is that they can create factors that are correlated factors or uncorrelated factors to each other. Rotations that allow for correlation are called oblique rotations. Rotations that assume the factors are not correlated are called orthogonal rotations. Our graph shows an orthogonal rotation. Once again, let's explore indicators of will. Let us imagine the orthogonal rotation did not work out as well as previously shown. Instead, we get this result. Variables: income, education, occupation, house value, number of public parks in neighborhood, number of violent crimes. Factor 1, 0.63, 0.47, 0.45, 0.39, 0.12, 0.21. Factor 2, 0.14, 0.24, 0.22, 0.25, 0.20, and 0.18. So based on the table, clearly no variable is loading highly onto factor 2. If you notice 0.14, 0.24, 0.22, 0.25, 0.20, 0.18, are actually lower than 0.4. We base our standard as acceptable loading would be at least 0.4. Since our first attempt was an orthogonal rotation, we specify that factor 1 and factor 2 are not correlated. But it makes sense to assume that a person with high individual socioeconomic status, factor 1, lives also in an area that has a high neighborhood socioeconomic status, factor 2. That means factors should be correlated. If you look at factor 1, 0.63, 0.48, 0.45, 0.39. Consequently, the two axes of the two factors are probably closer together than an orthogonal rotation can make them. Here's a display of the oblique rotation of the axis of our new example, in which factors are correlated with each other. Clearly, the angle between the two factors is now smaller than 90 degrees, meaning the factors are now correlated. In this example, an oblique rotation accommodates the data better than an orthogonal rotation. So how to reduce the number of variables to analyze? According to Ran and Giannoulis, way back 2001, many data sets contain well over 1,000 variables. Such complexity, the speed of contemporary desktop computers, and the ease of use of statistical analysis packages can encourage ill-directed analysis. It is easy to generate a vast array of poor results by throwing everything into your software and waiting to see what turns up. So why do variables need to be selected before analyzing the data? According to Ron and Giannoulis, way back 2001, the thoughtless analysis of data is a problem for a number of reasons. It is easy to consider into a data analysis without even thinking about what the intended endpoints are. Analysis without thinking will almost certainly produce biased results. Powerful multivariable techniques such as multiple regression make it easy to include a very large number of predictor variables in the hope of maximizing the explanatory power of the model. A similar problem occurs with factor analysis. There is nothing stopping us from factor analyzing a random set of variables. Factor analysis will nearly always produce a solution. However, it may well be a nonsense solution. Factor analysis is designed to identify sets of variables that are tapping the same underlying phenomenon. It does this by examining the patterns of correlations among a set of variables. The assumption of factor analysis is that the variables that are identified as belonging to a factor are really measuring the same thing. The factor itself is driving the responses on the individual variables. Therefore, they should not be causally related to each other. Unfortunately, factor analysis cannot distinguish between variables that are causally related and those that are non-causally related. This can result in variables being grouped together when they should not be. So it's up to you, the data analyst, to think about the possible types of relationship among the variables and not just let the software make the decisions. So the software would actually facilitate the computation, but the deeper analysis on the outputs of the software should be based on the thoughts, the logical mind of the data analyst. How to narrow down the choice of variables? According to Ran and Giannoulis, way back 2001, the selection of independent and dependent variables should be a function of the research question to which the data analysis is directed. Unless a clear research question is formulated, you will find no answers. It is as simple as that. One approach I usually follow is to draw diagrams of the model. I plan to evaluate before I begin to analyze the data. First, I state what my independent variable is. Then I specify the independent variable and the likely mechanisms by which the independent and dependent variables might be related to each other. As simple as it sounds, it is of paramount importance as it helps me make sense and guide the selection of variables for further analysis. When undertaking factor analysis, think about the variables involved before subjecting a set of variables to factor analysis. You should have some idea of what they might have in common. You should make some attempt to include variables that make sense together. You should also avoid including variables where any correlation is more likely due to causal relationship than to the variables having something in common at the conceptual level. So here's an example of factor analysis being applied into a thesis. It's actually the thesis of my advisee entitled Mathematics Teachers' Extent of Making Innovation in the Division of Dumaguete City, an exploratory factor analysis. It's actually a thesis presented to the faculty of the Graduate School, Negros Oriental State University, Dumaguete City, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree Master of Arts in Mathematics Teaching by Arturo O. Macias Jr. And I'm his advisor. So let me go directly to the statement of the problem. So his thesis has a total of 4 specific problems. And problem number 3, what are the latent factors underpinning the teacher's innovation in mathematics teaching, which can be identified using exploratory factor analysis? So this actually the specific statement of the problem that calls for factor analysis. So let me go directly to the presentation of his data about problem number 3. So what is being used in his thesis is exploratory factor analysis. So it's here, exploratory factor analysis. So the data collected for problem number 3 is presented in here. It's here, colored in yellow, highlighted in yellow. Perception of the respondents in the extent of innovation of mathematics teaching variables. So rating the items in 4 predetermined factors. So my advisee conceptualized 4 predetermined factors. So the first one, factor 1, the predetermined factor. 1, teaching strategies and lessons. And these are composed of Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q6, Q7, Q8, Q9, and then Q10. So Q1, I encourage students to discuss their mathematical ideas in groups with a member who is good in mathematics. So forth and so on up to Q10, I use games and other tools to link other subjects fields in my mathematics discussion. So all of these 10 items belong to factor 1, and factor 1 is being labeled as teaching strategies and lessons. And you have to take note na factor 1 is actually a predetermined factor by the researcher. Factor 2 is found in table 5. Factor 2, teaching materials and environments, an environment. So we have Q11, Q12, Q13, Q14, Q15, Q16, Q17, and Q18. So it starts from I use PowerPoint presentation or television in my mathematics teaching. Q12, I give my students assignment to enhance learning. So forth and so on up to Q18. I prepare worksheets and drill sheets frequently. So all of these items belong to factor 2, teaching materials and environment. You have to remember that factor 2 is a predetermined factor made by the researcher. Next is factor 3, found in table 6. Teachers enhancement. So it is composed of Q19, Q20, Q21, Q22, Q23, then Q24. I joined seminars and trainings about mathematics teaching for Q19. Q20, I make sure that I read more about techniques in teaching the subject. So forth and so on up to Q24. I look for opportunities to know more or ask questions about how to bring new ideas into my mathematics class. So Q19 up to Q24 belong to factor 3, which is being labeled as teachers enhancement. And still you have to remember that factor 3 is being predetermined by the researcher himself. Next is factor 4, teacher's attitude as presented in table 7. So Q25, Q26, Q27, Q28, Q29, Q30, Q31, Q32, Q33. So Q25, whatever mathematics innovation is introduced, I will continue to teach in the old way. Q26, I am open to changes in the system and easily adapts with it. So forth and so on up to Q33. I depend mainly on my knowledge and skills when I am teaching mathematics. So Q33 are items that belong to factor 4, teacher's attitude. And you have to remember that factor 4 labeled as teacher's attitude are being predetermined by the researcher himself. So we have factor 1, factor 2, factor 3, and factor 4 are being predetermined by the researcher himself. So let me go back to factor 1. So we have here perception of the respondents in the extent of innovation of mathematics teaching variables. So the respondents rated the items in the 4 predetermined factors. What are those predetermined factors? Factor 1, teaching strategies and lessons. Factor 2, teaching materials and environment. Factor 3, found in table 6, teachers enhancement. And factor 4, found in table 7, teachers of attitude. So all of the 4 are actually predetermined factors. So my advisee made use of exploratory factor analysis. So the mean and standard deviations of all the 33 items as illustrated in tables 4 to 7 is the first part of the test. Item number Q25, even with small mean, was retained because it affects the other items. As the objectivity of this study, R-type factor analysis had applied to the correlation matrix of the variables. So we look into exploratory factor analysis. So looking into the principal component analysis as found in table 8. So we have factors named. So we have constructivism, then followed by positive teaching attitude, followed by designing teaching materials, then stimulating strategies. So if you remember the 4, so we have to look back the 4 predetermined factors, teaching strategies and lessons. We have teaching materials and environment. Then we have teachers enhancement. And the last one is all about teachers attitude. And through exploratory factor analysis, using principal component analysis. So the factors name are being changed into constructivism, then positive teaching attitude, designing teaching materials, and then stimulating strategies. So if you look at constructivism, it is actually composed of Q26, Q27, Q28, and then Q29. So what are these items? I am open to changes in the system and easily adapts with it. I accept students' unexpected responses to a question about a mathematics problem and cater to it. I am happy for students to challenge incorrect mathematical expressions on the blackboard that have been made with or without intent. Q29, I encourage students to explain their own strategies of mathematical solutions or methods to the class. And if we look at the factor loading 0.813, 0.08, 0.750, 0.660. So if we consider at least 0.4 as our standard, then all of these factor loadings are actually meeting that standard. And my advisee term these statements, Q26, Q27, Q28, Q29 as constructivism. So how did my advisee came up with constructivism? Of course, he did an intensive research on how to call Q26, Q27, Q28, then Q29. Aside from conducting review of related literature, he consulted also experts on whether constructivism would fit to Q26, Q27, Q28, and then Q29. And validations have been conducted by different experts on whether these different items, Q26, Q27, Q28, then Q29, can be called as constructivism. The second factor is all about positive teaching attitude. And this one is composed of Q22, we have Q23, Q24, and the factor loadings, we have 0.836, 0.804, then 0.732, which actually meet the standard of at least 0.4 factor loading. And again, my advisee did an intensive review of related literature on how to call Q22, Q23, and Q24. And finally, he called it positive teaching attitude. So Q22, I asked other teachers' opinion and learned from their experiences. Q23, I used different form of genre to learn mathematics more. Q24, I look for opportunities to know more or ask questions about how to bring new ideas into my mathematics classroom. And of course, different experts have been consulted also. And the term positive teaching attitude has been validated by different experts, aside from intensive readings on how to call these different statements. The next term is designing teaching materials, and it's composed of Q14, Q15, then Q16. So what are these? Q14, I use mathematical tools such as GeoBoard, Compass, and Protractor in my teaching. I prepare visual aids frequently. Q16, I design bulletin boards with math-related concepts. The factor loading, 0.785, 0.730, 0.729. And all of these are actually greater than 0.4. 0.4 as the point of reference for acceptable loadings. So again, my advisee did an intensive research on how to call these statements from Q14, Q15 to Q16. And finally, he came up with the term designing teaching materials. And of course, this term has been validated by experts. The last one is stimulating strategies. And this one is composed of Q3, Q5, then Q10. I encourage students to work on real-life related problems by themselves. Q5, I use thought-provoking problems in my lesson. Q10, I use games and other tools to link other subjects fields in my mathematics discussion. Factor loading 0.785, 0.730, 0.729. A factor loading greater than 0.4. So 0.4 is our point of reference as acceptable factor loading. So again, my advisee, Mr. Macias, did an intensive research and then validated this term by panel of experts on whether stimulating strategies would be the right term for Q3, Q5, and Q10. So initially, the predetermined factors were named as teaching strategies and lessons, teaching materials and environment, teachers enhancement, and teaching attitude. Through factor analysis, those different factors are being named, and they are being called constructivism, positive teaching attitude, designing teaching materials, and stimulating strategies. If you count the number of factors, actually the same. The first one, 1, 2, 3, and 4. After the factor analysis, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 also. But if you notice, the different statements that belong to each of the 4 new factors are being reduced. If you notice, constructivism, factor 1 is composed only of 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And then positive teaching attitude, 1, 2, 3. And then designing teaching materials, we have 1, 2, and then 3. Stimulating strategies, 1, 2, and then 3. So overall, if we're going to count the items that belong to the new naming of the factors, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 items being distributed to stimulating strategies, designing teaching materials, positive teaching attitude, and constructivism. But if you look at the predetermined factors, so we have factor 1 composed of 10, then we have 11 to 18 for factor 2. Then from question 19 to Q24 factor 3, and from Q25 to Q33 factor 4. So originally there were 33, but after factor analysis, the remaining statements is now 13. So 33, after the factor analysis, we have a total of 13. I repeat, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So from 33, it is being reduced to 13 statements. And still the number of factors 4, we have constructivism, positive teaching attitude, designing teaching materials, stimulating strategies, 4. But each is composed of fewer sub-items. And that's why we classify factor analysis as a way of reducing many variables into smaller number or fewer number of variables. But I'd like to have this thing that the naming of the new factors would be so difficult. This is actually a difficult part because you have to think logically on what would be the exact term, the appropriate term, the logical term for Q26, Q27, Q28, then Q29. Positive teaching attitude. It took time for my advisee to come up with this term, in which this is actually a term for Q22, Q23, and Q24. For Q14, Q15, Q16, the term is designing teaching materials. It's not actually done overnight, but as I mentioned earlier, an intensive research is being done how to call these terms. So with Q3, Q5, and Q10 being called as stimulating strategies. So the naming of the new factors would be classified also as a difficult part because you have to validate that one through different literature and according to some of the logical thoughts of experts. So that's actually one of the examples that I would like to share in this webinar about factor analysis in a thesis. So let me share another one. So factor analysis being used in validation. So I got this from a journal and the title is One Size Doesn't Fit All, using factor analysis to gather validity evidence when using surveys in your research. So factor analysis is being used for validation of a certain instrument. So let me go directly to Table 1. So Table 1 is actually talking about types of validity evidence to consider when validating an instrument according to standards for educational psychological testing association. And it's actually part of the research methodology. When an instrument is actually being developed by the researcher, a researcher-made instrument, you need to validate the instrument. And one of the things that you are going to consider in validating the researcher-made instrument is through the use of factor analysis. But let me review about the different types of validity. So we have evidence-based on test content, evidence-based on response process, evidence-based on internal structure, evidence-based on relations to other variables, evidence-based on the consequences of testing. So let me define as being reflected in this table. Evidence based on test content, analysis of the relationship between an instrument's content and the construct it is intended to measure. For evidence based on response process, information on how respondents answer the instrument's items. Evidence based on internal structure, analysis of internal relationships between instrument items and instrument components and how they conform to the intended construct. Evidence based on relation to other variables, analysis of the relationships of instrument scores to variables external to the instrument and to other instruments that measure the same construct or related constructs. So evidence based on the consequences of testing, the extent to which the consequences of the use of the score are congruent with the proposed uses of the instrument. So, example considerations. Does this instrument represent the appropriate aspects of communal goals construct as described by the theoretical framework? Second, is it reasonable to assume that the respondents were motivated and honest when answering the instrument? Did the respondents understand the items as intended by the researcher? Does factor analysis support the relationships between items suggested by the theoretical framework? Can the instrument detect differences in the strength of the communal goal endorsement between women and men that has been found by other instruments? Does the instrument correlate in expected ways with similar and or dissimilar measures? Will the use of the instrument cause by unintended consequences for the respondents? Is the instrument identifying students who need extra resources as intended? So you have to take note that validation of the instrument is very important. If it is poorly validated, it's not scientifically validated, then it would affect the major findings as well as the conclusions of the entire study. So one thing to consider in validating an instrument is to the use of factor analysis as being illustrated in this article. So we have table 2. Table 2, items included in the Dickman et al. Goal endorsement instrument. So items, we have power up to 23 spiritual rewards. And we have 3-factor solution, 4-factor solution, 5-factor solution. So I will not be discussing on how these values are being determined, are being calculated. The next webinar series will be talking about the computations. Let me look at into the original items from item 1 up to item 23. And how are we going to classify, to cluster these different items? So looking into factor analysis. If you look at into exploratory factor analysis in a theoretical perspective, so we have factor 1, factor 2. So we have composed of item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. And for factor 2, we also have item 8, item 7, item 6, item 5, item 4, item 3, item 2, and item 1. It's actually a figure that shows exploratory factor analysis. In terms of confirmatory factor analysis, you would notice now we have factor 1 and factor 2, and the components of factor 1 are actually different from the components of factor 1. So item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4 belong to factor 1, item 5, item 6, item 7, item 8 belong to factor 2. So there is what we call independence between factor 1 and factor 2. This one, in the exploratory factor analysis, factor 1 and factor 2, you will notice that there are common between factor 1 and factor 2. So looking into factor analysis, applying factor analysis, we come up with this. So table 3, still we have item 1 to item 23. So if we look at table 2, let me go back to table 2. So we have still the same number of items, item 1 to item 23. But if you look at table 3, table 3 is actually having the specific clustering. We have 1, 0.84, 0.80, 0.80, 0.75, 0.74, then 0.50. Then we have factor 2, 0.75, 0.60, 0.56, 0.76, 0.55. We have a smaller loading 0.20. We have 0.65, 0.69, 0.50, 0.55 for number 3. Column 4, 0.94, 0.53. And column 5, we have 0.81, 0.55, then 0.40. So it is being clarified in here that coefficients less than 0.2 are not being shown in the table. So if you notice, all of these coefficients are greater than 0.20 or equal to 0.20. So we look up into the groupings. So we have here prestige. If you look at this, prestige, autonomy, competency, service, and then connection. So item 1, 2, 5, 8, and 11, prestige. So if you look at 1, 2, 5, 8, and then 11. All of these factor loadings are greater than 0.4. And we have this in this diagram, 1, 2, 5, 8, and 11. And all of these items are being named as prestige. So if you look at the term prestige, we have power, recognition, then self-promotion, status, then financial rewards. So the researcher is able to come up with the term prestige. But of course, it's not actually an easy way of determining the term for this is actually prestige. It has to be researched, it has to be validated by experts. Second is on autonomy, and it is composed of 6, 7, 9, and 12. 6, 7, 9, and 12. So that's number 6, number 7, number 9, and number 12. Number 6, independence. Number 7, individualism. Then number 9, focus on the self. Number 12, self-direction, 0.55. And if you look at these different items, they can be classified as autonomy. And of course, it's actually being researched by the author and being validated also by experts and even through the use of review of related literature. The next is competency. We have 3, 10, and 13. So if you look at 3, 10, and 13, so we have number 3, achievement, number 10, success, and number 10, demonstrating skills or competence, 0.40. So all of these are actually being named as competency. And factor loadings, we have greater than 0.4, 0.74, 0.67, 0.56. Then the next factor is service. So we have 15, 16, 17, 20, and 21. Service. So helping others, serving humanity, serving community, attending to others, caring for others, spiritual rewards. So all of those are actually termed as service. The name of the factor is service. And it's actually very logical that these items are being labeled as service. Helping others, serving humanity, serving community, attending to others, caring for others, spiritual rewards. It's actually service. And the last name of the factor, connection. It is composed of item 18 and item 19. So we have here 18 and 19. So look at the factor loadings, 18.94. It's actually working with people and then connecting with others, 0.53. And that's actually connection. It's actually a right term, no? Connection. If you look at the statements 18 and 19, working with people and connection with others. So the right term is connection. Of course, there are times that you can think easily about the term based on the statements provided. And we have to think that the term being used for the new factor's name should be very logical, and they actually justify and actually correlate with the different items in the cluster. So looking into the final one, table 4, propose 5-factor solution. So we have service, helping others, serving humanity, serving community, attending to others, caring for others, spiritual rewards, prestige, status, power, recognition, self-promotion, financial rewards, autonomy, individualism, independence, self-direction, focus on the self, connection, working with people, connection with others, competency, achievement, success, and then competence. So these are actually the new names of the factors. So if you consider from the very beginning, we have the contents of the instrument. So the instrument is composed of 23 items, number 1, number 2, up to number 23. But if you look at table 2, there are no specific clustering of the different items. But looking at factor analysis, we are able to, the author of this article is able to come up with the clustering of the different items. And what are those different clusters? So we have service, prestige, autonomy, connection, and competency. So how many items? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So 20 are included in the final. Originally, there are 23 as found in table 2. But now in table 4, it's 20. And these 20 are being clustered according to service, prestige, autonomy, connection, and then competency. So those are actually some very common examples that I can actually talk about in this webinar about the basic concepts of factor analysis and common examples of factor analysis. So thank you very much. Again, this is Dr. Craig and Refugio from Negros Oriental State University, Main Campus 1, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Extension of the Basic Education Math Teacher Society. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Refugio, for the wonderful presentation of factor analysis. Let me invite everyone at this Zoom meeting and on our live YouTube viewers. If you have some questions, please type it in the chat box or in the comment section. We are giving everyone 5 minutes to send their questions if they have any questions in the chat box or in the comment section via YouTube Live. And may I invite our Zoom participants to please open their cameras so that we may be able to be seen in the YouTube Live. Yeah. There is one question here. I think Dr. Refugio is asked for a copy of the research paper being presented, sir, from Jessie Susada. Sir Refugio, they are asking for a copy of the topic discussed. We'll make sure po that we will be able to provide a copy from our speaker of the presentation that he had. Some more questions po. Yan. Sir, go ahead po.
Okay. Good morning. Yeah. I can send the even the document that I did in my lecture and the journal article also to Dolph, and then I think he will be posting that one into our FB page.
Yes, sir. Thank you po for that answer. Some more questions po from our audience via Facebook, via YouTube Live, and via Zoom. By the way po, let me remind everyone, if they have not yet filled out the attendance form and the pre-test earlier, I'll be resending that in our chat box so you would be able to sign our attendance. After this, by the way, we will have a short workshop which would be explained by our speaker. Sir, here's another question from, I think this is Sir Jesse Susada. When do we use CFA and EFA? That's the question, sir.
Okay. When you're going to explore something, like I mentioned about latent factors, and you're going to explore latent factors, then you can use exploratory factor analysis. However, if you have read actually something and they're actually clustered into different components, and you want to validate that one because you believe that maybe you are going to use that one in another setting. So maybe you can use again factor analysis, but it would be confirmatory factor analysis to confirm something that is being established already. So for example, in a theory, you're able to read something that these are the components of blah, blah, blah. Then these are the components of blah, blah, blah. These are the components of blah, blah, blah. And we have to remember that in a theory, it might be true or it might be false. So you can actually apply confirmatory factor analysis for that. And why I say you don't need to use exploratory factor analysis just in a theory, all those concepts or constructs are actually written for a certain component. In another component, these are actually being specified by the author or the proponent of the theory. And all that you are going to do is to confirm what is in the theory. If you have actually component 1, component 2, component 3 for factor 1. And then for another factor, we have another component, another factor, another component in a theoretical perspective. So what you are going to consider is apply confirmatory factor analysis. But if at the start, like you are actually making a researcher-made instrument, so you actually categorize your items, or if not, the items are actually general, and you're going to explore which are actually the exact indicators through factor analysis. So make use of exploratory factor analysis.
I hope, Sir Susada, that your question has been answered. Nag-comment na po, sir. Okay, that is duly noted, sir. Thank you very much. Maybe one last question po from our Zoom participants, if there is any, before we proceed with our workshop. I think there is none, sir. So shall we proceed po sa ating workshop? All right. So I will be presenting in a short while the workshop part. Actually, it's here. I hope everyone could see it. Sir, so can you give us the complete instruction for this one?
Okay. All parties. This is actually our simple workshop for this morning. I have the table presented on the screen, and you have factor 1 and you have factor 2. And I would like you to make use of your own idea, or maybe your logical idea on how to name factor one and how to name factor two. In my talk, I discuss about what are those different coefficients to be considered important components of the factor. So like factor one, then factor two. So what are those different observable behavior which can be classified as very important components for factor one and for factor two? And then that's part of the activity, and you are going to name factor one and you are going to name factor two. So we're going to give you 30 minutes para you can actually do also discussion among members of our breakout session. We're going to have 6 right now, survey 6
Yes po.
breakout rooms, and then you can discuss on how to name factor one, how to name factor two, and why 30 minutes? Because we are giving time also, you can browse the internet, because as I mentioned, you have to read also related literature. And I know some of you are exposed to factor analysis. You can think also based on your stock knowledge on how to name factor one and how to name factor two. And then when we go back to the main panel after the breakout session, each group has to present. So within the breakout session time, kind of choose a presenter of your output and then do the presentation and do also the justification why you name that one blah 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 and why you name factor two as blah blah blah. And take note that if we look at into factor analysis, different researchers may have different namings of the factors depending on the justification. Just like in the presentation that I did, I presented the work of my advisee. So the naming of the new factors can be also different if another researcher will do the naming. In the journal article that I have presented, those are actually the names of the new factors. But if other researcher would view into that, there might be a possibility that the naming would be different from what is presented by the author. So the same to our case, we might come up with different namings. But the only thing is, you can actually justify why you name that one, and factor two is named blah, 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 and you can always justify that one. It's very logical to name factor one as blah, 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 and very logical to name factor two as blah, blah, blah. Okay? Sige.
Thank you, sir. I hope everyone has understood what we are about to do for the breakout sessions. So I'm giving everyone 30 seconds to take a screenshot of this table so that everyone should have a copy once they enter the breakout rooms. Again, the breakout room will be randomized into 6 rooms. So please enter after you have completely had your screenshot of this table. I also opened the share screen button so that someone among the group or among the room should be able to share the table that is being presented right now, and so you could talk about it as soon as you go with your discussions. All right. So I think can you use po thumbs up reactions if you have taken a screenshot of this table already? Nandyan po yan sa inyong mga laptops. Yan. Thank you po for the reactions. Or if you have some desktops you are using right now, nandyan po sa reactions yung thumbs up. All right. I guess everyone is ready. So I'll be opening up our breakout sessions, and you will be notified 1 minute before the end of the 30 minutes that the breakout room will about to be closed. So our 30 minutes starts now. Just click join the room that is about to pop up in your screens. Again po, please click join room para po makapasok tayo sa ating mga breakout rooms. Now, for our YouTube live viewers, you may also try naming our factors 1 and 2, and maybe you could comment it later on in the comment section. For the remaining participants in our Zoom, kindly join your rooms. You should be able to see join button for the breakout rooms, or there should be a pop-up on your device showing that you are about to join the room. Thank you very much. To our YouTube Live participants, please stand by po. Breakout session is ongoing in our Zoom meeting. So please stand by. We will begin again at exactly 10:28 a.m. Again, a pleasant morning po to our YouTube Live viewers. We are still having our breakout session at the moment. Our Zoom participants will be able to return at exactly 10:28 a.m. for their presentation of outputs. Again, um, we are encouraging everyone to fill out the attendance sheet if they have not yet filled out their attendance sheet. Pindutin nyo lang po ang bit.ly/FA capital letter BEMTS dash day 1. So i-comment ko po ulit yon sa ating YouTube Live para po makita ninyo along with the link of the pre-test. Again po, in a few moments, I will be sending the link of the pre-test and attendance in the YouTube Live so that everyone should be able to access and answer it. To our YouTube Live viewers, I have sent our attendance and pre-test link in the chat, a comment section. You should be able to see it now in there. Thank you very much. I hope everyone will fill out the forms that I have sent there so that you would be acknowledged and you would receive your certificate of participation after the 3-day seminar workshop. Thank you very much.
Hello. Oh, you're back.
Welcome back po to our participants in the Zoom session. I hope every room here was able to talk about what you are supposed to discuss for our group presentations. Patingin naman po ng mga heart reacts kung ready na po tayo.
Hindi pa masyado, sir.
Hindi pa raw masyado. Okay, heart react po tayo. Okay, I also encourage those who will be presenting the group's work to please open your cameras po if you would be able to open it so that mas maganda pong tignan yung ating live session. All right, so I guess everyone is back. We're still waiting for others to come back. Let me check po sa ating breakout rooms. So earlier, we have grouped you into 6 rooms. And ito po yung ating mga rooms. No? So isa-isahin po natin. Who would like to volunteer from among our participants who would start the discussion of your outputs? Syempre po, we would like to get the comments later on from our speaker, Mr. Craig Refugio, about your presentation. Meron po bang mag-raise ng hand and mag-start ng ating discussion? Kung hindi po, ako po ang tatawag ng room. Okay. Mukhang nagkakahiyaan po tayo. So, I think we should start with the room that has the most number of participants. And that is room number 6. Okay. So, anyone po from room 6 who would like to present their work? Room 6, we have Ayan, si Sir David. Okay. You could start opening your microphone po and camera, Sir David. And I opened the unmute button po, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, sir, for a while.
Yes, sir. So for room 6, I'll just be introducing the members that is represented by Sir David Kyle Lagi. So we have Ma'am Heidi Cana, Ma'am Noemi Villa, Ma'am Maria Marichu Bores, Ananias Jr. Yunzal, Teumar Roma, Ricky May Gilling. So sila po yung members ng ating room 6.
Sir, let me check if my presentation is visible.
Yes po, it is visible, sir.
For a while. Thank you, Sir Reynaldo. So I will be presenting the collaborative effort of Group 6. So I'm Sir David, and with me Sir Ananias and the rest. And Sir Ananias would support me if you have any follow-up questions with this presentation. So these emerging factors may refer to personality characteristics to effective performance of faculty members in an educational setting. Organized, systematic, are positively correlated with one another and negatively correlated with careless. Thus, the factor careless changed to careful. But all are not correlated with creative, intellectual, and imaginative. On the other hand, creative, intellectual, and imaginative are all correlated with one another, but they are not correlated with organized, systematic, and careless. The first defined groups are organized, systematic, and careful that was changed from careless, named as faculty effective performance, while the last or the remaining factors that was determined, creative, intellectual, imaginative, were named as faculty cognitive engagement. So that ends our presentation, sir.
Thank you very much, Sir David Kyle and room 6 participants. Now, can we have some reactions from our speaker?
Sir Ray, I'll just give my comments after all groups.
Noted, sir. Okay, again, thank you very much and congratulations for the room 6 participants and group.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Congrats, now, let's move on. Let's move on po to our next presenters. This is the second most number of participants, and it's for room number 1. So room number 1 have the following participants: Sir Ricky Baranda, Sir Lloyd Tipay, Ma'am Maria Chona Futalan, Ma'am Rina V. D. Caracena, Ma'am Annalisa EY, and Ma'am G. Okay, anyone po from room 1?
Good morning, sir.
Yes po, you are heard po.
Ma'am Sean, we don't have anything to present. Like the table kanina sir, can we just simply state what we have come up with during the breakout?
Yes po, sure po.
Sean, you'll do the honor? Sean,
Ma'am, you present it, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so from the room 1, we have come up with, in as much that in the observed variable, we have number 1, organized, 2, systematic, 3, careless, 4, creative, 5, intellectual, 6, imaginative. For factor 1, under conscientiousness, we have there clustered the organized, systematic, and careless into naming it as methodical skills. Why methodical skills? Because if you are going to look into the similarity of the terminologies under organized, systematic, and careless, they are somehow interrelated with each other, and as much that when we talk of methodical skills, it is done according to a systematic or established form of procedure. Now, when we talk of procedures, now skills can be organized, can be systematic, can be careless. And then it would also entail of following a particular method. Now, for factor 2, we have clustered the creative, intellectual, and the imaginative as the reasoning skills, coherent with the factor 1 as methodical skills. Reasoning, why? Because when we talk of creative, intellectual, imaginative, it merely pertains to the use of the intellect. Now, reasoning, in as much that it is a central and important skills, think it needs the use of our thinking ability to whatever conclusions that it would support and structural reasons as evidences of a particular study. And that's also for room 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Rina V. Caracena, for presenting your output to every one of us. So as we have seen, there are different namings and justifications as why we have named the factors 1 and 2 respectively. Now let's move on to another presenters. This time, let me call on room number 3. Room number 3 are Ma'am Ronaldin Albesa, Ma'am Charmaine A. Kisomison, Marisa Cayabyab, Milagros Niquintos, Civil Nino Dumanon, Evangeline Pailmao, and Mercy Picar. Anyone po from room 3?
Hello po, good morning.
Yes po, good morning, ma'am.
Sir, sa room number 3, masyadong nagkakahiyaan pa kaming anim, pero we come up with these factors, or we give names to these factors, like factors 1, variables 1, 2, and 3. We named it as achievement-oriented because as an achiever, so as mentioned, careless is an opposite to organized and systematic. But anyone could be sometimes careless, though hindi natin yun sinasadya. So we call it as achievement-oriented. While the second factor, we call it as cognitive-oriented, since the 3 variables are related to cognitive, sir. So that's what we got from our room, and thank you. Thanks to our members. Kahit meron kaming mga factors na nagkakahiyaan, pero we discussed, we talk, and we give our best. So thank you po.
Yan. So may nakikita po tayong mga similarities, no? Variables 1, 2, and 3 are being clustered into one group. The same with 4, 5, and 6 from among the presenters that we have so far. So let's see if we would have the same observations for the next rooms. Let me call on room number 4 this time. Ma'am Arlen Villarte, Sir Efren Milio, Jennifer De Los Santos, Teresa Amores, Grace Abalde. Anyone po? Again po, for room number 4, Ma'am Arlen Villarte, Efren Milio, Jennifer De Los Santos, Teresa Amores, and Grace Abalde. I guess room number 4 are struggling with their connection. So let's go back to them later on. Siguro po I'll call on room number 5 this time. Ma'am Eloisa Candido Cruz, June Ann Marie, Normina Batukan.
Good morning po. Am I audible po?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Sir, allow me to present or share my screen po. Saglit lang po ah. Okay po. Is my screen po visible na?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay po. For our group po, as checking on the terms given to us, the different variables po. For the first factor po, we named it affective or affective domain, basing it on the revised Bloom's taxonomy, wherein affective domain means the domain of valuing, attitude, and appreciation, wherein being organized, being systematic, and being careless falls under it po. We base it also on preparing teacher subjective, or how is it to be a teacher, being organized, systematic, and careless po. Well, for the second factor po, which we classified or named as a cognitive domain, because as per the revised Bloom's taxonomy, cognitive domain refers to domain of thought and process. It follows with the different variables given: creative, intellectual, and imaginative po. That's all po. Thank you. That's for group 5 po.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Eloisa, for presenting Group 5's work. So again, same observation from the previous presentations. The first three variables being given earlier are clustered along with each other, while the last three variables are also grouped into one category. All right, shall we proceed with room number 2? Ma'am Evangeline David, Juvie Butasla, and Jeneline Entong, sorry.
Ray, you assigned me to that group, no?
Yes, po.
You assigned me to that group, so I facilitated the discussion. So, first, I'll be talking na lang with our output, and then for everything, no? But if yung isa pang grupo is ready, so can you let them present muna before our group?
Yes po. Let's go back for now. For room number 4 group, we have Miss Arlene Villarte, Sir Efren Milio, Teresa Amores, and Grace Abalde. Anyone po from that group? Let me check the participants. Nabawasan na po yung ating, mukhang nahirapan po sa connection. So if anyone is here po from the group, would you please talk about your output? The unmute buttons are already open po, so anyone po from the group would be able to present their output. We would be glad to hear you. Yeah, I believe Dr. Fujio, they are not able to join at the moment, maybe of some restrictions in their connection. So let's proceed po on your group.
Very much. Okay. So actually, the talk that we have is actually we don't something to present, but I'd like to present our deliberation. It's a very good deliberation. Si Ma'am Jenny is asking on for what purpose are these observable variables are actually being used, in which I was not able to post that one part of the table, because when we look up into different observable variables or components or the latent factors, we actually look up into the purpose of the study, the purpose of the study. However, I was not able to have it with the expectation that you can think of an application on the naming to different perspectives. It might be in terms of job performance. It might be in terms of teaching performance or job performance in a company or in a school, or maybe a quality, effective qualities of leaders, effective qualities of teachers, so forth and so on. And then in the screenshot, factor 1 is actually originally named as consciousness. And then factor 2 is named as intellect. That's the original naming based on the source that I have actually considered. But I mentioned earlier that different components can be named in different ways depending on the justification of the researcher or the proponent, depending on the review of related literature being considered, and also the thoughts or ideas of the experts. So of the different presentations, I would agree with the naming because you're able to come up with justification. The most important thing in a scientific method is that it's logical and you're able to justify what you're actually presenting in the output. Now, looking into the factor loading of conscientiousness, factor 1, you notice there's a negative loading there. It's negative 0.70. And in my group, sabi ni Jeneline, Jeneline asked me, how do we consider that one? If we look up into job performance, to be effective in the job in the job, you need to be organized. You need to be systematic, but you don't need to be careless. So forth and so on. And she asked me, can we take the opposite? Yes, you can actually take the opposite. As mentioned in one of the presentation, they changed that one from careless to careful. It's actually having a negative loading. And what's actually the indication of a negative loading? For example, yung careless negative with job performance. Because having an effective performance, if somebody is careless, then they're actually looking into different directions. So literature would say you can change the opposite of that term, or you can actually reject that one. Do not consider that one in the final naming of the variable. So I would agree with that group. I think group 6 na nag-change siya from careless to careful. I would agree with that. And that's also the idea of Ma'am Jeneline in our group. She told me, sir, can we take the opposite since the loading is negative? Yes, some literature about factor analysis is actually looking into that perspective. And some are actually into a sense of deleting that one in the final naming of the variable. So I agree with all your justifications. No? And then to the group also where being organized, being systematic, and being careless could be part of the affective skills. I would actually consider that one. And then cognitive also for being creative, being intellectual, and being imaginative. So that could be part also of the cognitive. So generally, when you are going to name different components of the factors, like factor 1 and factor 2, you are going to consider also the purpose of doing it. That's actually the purpose of the study. And you can actually relate that one. No? That's why I told Ma'am Jeneline, that's actually a very good question, Ma'am Jeneline, which I actually not able to present that in the screenshot on what is actually the purpose of that factor analysis. So congratulations, no? Group 6, except group 5, no, is not able to present. Group 4, no, is not able to present. So I agree with you with your justifications. No? In general, we can name factor 1 in different perspective. We can name factor 2 in different perspective as long as you're able to justify that one. A justification, not only yourself is able to justify. I am not saying about it. but even the literature could actually justify that one. And in some cases, you can name that factor and then you can apply citation, no? According to blah, 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 according to blah, blah, blah. You can actually quote unquote, no? Different experts on why you come up with that kind of name. And that's a very good idea also of naming different components of certain factor. That's all po.
Sir, somebody is raising his hand. Sir Ananias, do you have a question po or concern?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Go ahead po.
Okay, so I was part of the group 6, sir. Initially, by looking at the factor loading with the negative value, I suggest to how do you call this one, to omit that one from the group. However, one of my group mates saying, no, we just include that one. Now, in this, sir, kanabang, when can we, kasi the careless na variable, sir, it is, I think, I appreciate that one as binary in nature. So meaning to say, binary na siya exact na opposite, exact opposite, right? So, so in that case, sir, can we just, the naming of a certain variable, sir, the modification, sir, is it true only to binary na mga variables o hindi? Kasi in this case, sir, binary man ang ano.
Easy, no? Pag binary, it's easy, no? It's easy to take the opposite. But if it's not binary, it would be so difficult. And I would say it would be better to delete that one because there might be a case even if you consider one of the many components, it does not capture everything. So literature would say if it's binary, then you can actually take the opposite. However, if it is not binary, then some authors, or based on my readings, authors would say just don't include that one because having many other things that would be considered for that component having a negative loading would not be the exact one as being mentioned in the actual data collection.
In addition, sir, is there any, say, statistical considerations when to omit a negative factor loading, sir?
Yeah, I don't touch that one because the technical part is actually by next Saturday. And if you notice, I just discussed on the analysis. But into the first table, the second table, the item or step-by-step outputs, no, from the software to the final output, I just leave that one for the next webinar on how to consider that one.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I agree with that, taking the opposite because it's a binary one. But when you are going to have many possibilities, many other things to consider, so authors, experts would say just delete that one in the factor components. So.
Thank you very much, Sir Ananias, for asking that question. And I also have learned a lot from that discussion. Thank you very much as well to Dr. Refugio for being able to share with us some knowledge and skills regarding the use of factor analysis. I guess we still have no questions from the YouTube Live as I am looking at it right now. Wala naman pong questions. So, are there any final words, sir, before we proceed with our closing remarks?
Yeah, I really appreciate your presentation on the naming kasi yung main purpose ko ng talk ko for the first day of the BMTS webinar is actually on the appreciation of factor analysis. That's why I did not touch on the pure essence of the symbols in factor analysis, and then from the raw data into the presentation of the different tables, how to present those different tables. I leave that one to Dr. Ray for next Saturday's webinar. But I purposely did on the discussion on how are we going to name and what are the different considerations on why we say this component is actually very important. And then we look up into different applications also. So I did not touch actually on the technical part, from software to the final output. And then you're very correct, with your ideas like naming names of the factors, and then looking into, I appreciate that one, sir, yung kay yung kanina sa group 6 about binary and those terms nga hindi binary, which I was not able to talk about it before your clarification. So we have to be very careful. And the most thing to consider is read a lot of literature about factor analysis. There might be some things that I am not able to share this morning, but there are still out there, to be considered as part of very important ideas in making an analysis for factor analysis. So what I'm saying is that I may not be able to, I might not able to give everything or a comprehensive idea about factor analysis. But to my mind, the very basic concept is actually being shared on how it is being used. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Refugio, for the wonderful discussion of factor analysis. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the last part of the program, which is the closing remarks. So let me invite the instructor of University of San Jose Recoletos, Secretary of Basic Education Mathematics Teacher Society Incorporated, Facilitator of Private Education Assistance Committee, and Facilitator of Commission in Higher Education. Let us welcome Ms. Annabel Q. Solano.
Daniel Case Moran says that you cannot have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. Data is a precious thing and will last longer than the systems themselves. Distinguished guests, teacher participants, ladies and gentlemen, good day. Since we start our seminar workshop a while ago, we have had a great time together listening to our esteemed resource speaker, Dr. Craig Refugio from Negros Oriental State University, who introduced to us the first topic on this 3-day seminar workshop entitled Conducting and Interpreting Factor Analysis, which we learned earlier that factor analysis attempts to discover the unexplained factors that influence the covariation among multiple observations. These factors represent underlying concepts that cannot be adequately measured by a single variable. For example, various measures of political attitudes may be influenced by one or more underlying factors. At this very moment, the first day of our seminar workshop are coming to a successful conclusion. On behalf of the Basic Education Math Teacher Society Incorporated, in collaboration with the Department of Education School Division of Mandaluyong City, Marikina City, and Parañaque City, I extend a very warm gratitude to you for joining the opening of our first webinar conducted by the Basic Education Math Teacher Society. I would also like to express sincere thanks to our resource speaker, members of the organization, Basic Education Math Teacher Society officers, headed by our dynamic president, Dr. Rodolfo T. Aunso, our sponsors, volunteers, and those behind this activity for your participation and great support. Speaking of support, the organization will spearhead a virtual international research conference on January 27 to 29, 2022 with plenary speakers coming from Poland, Vietnam, Malaysia, South Africa, and India. Continue to support the activities of the organization for the realization of its advocacy to help teachers to be updated with the changes of teaching and learning in this new normal. Since the commencement of our activity today, teachers and school practitioners across different regions have come together to listen the insightful ideas of our discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to all participants who attended this webinar. That your participation and cooperation means a lot to the organizers of this event. Despite some of us having difficulty with the internet connection, your hard work and persistence in making this seminar workshop a success. I am hoping that the training which our resource speakers shared to us had served as an avenue to widen our knowledge, especially in research. Without the concerted efforts of all parties involved, the seminar workshop of conducting and interpreting factor analysis a success could not have been realized. I am Annabel Soliano, the Executive Secretary of the Basic Education Math Teacher Society, saying thank you very much once again. See you virtually next Saturday and keep safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Again, we remind everyone and we thank everyone for attending this session. We will still have 2 more sessions for the following Saturdays, particularly on October 23 and October 30. For our Zoom participants, you will use the same Zoom links. And for our YouTube Live viewers, we will post the link in the Facebook page of Math Team Mandaluyong for your reference. Again, this is your host from SDO Mandaluyong, thanking the Basic Education Mathematics Teachers Society Incorporated, along with Schools Division Office of Mandaluyong City, Marikina City, and Parañaque City. According to Charles F. Kettering, research means that you don't know, but you are willing to find out. Good day, keep safe, and God bless us all.
Thank you.
Hello, Sir Craig. Hello, Sir Craig. Good morning.
Na-unmute na
Sir Ray, good morning.
Nag-brown out di ay kalit sa amo.